day! Fired!
One of Pixar's underrated films is Ratatouille. It's one of the very few films that doesn't have a sequel or a prequel to it, and even though it doesn't have a very inspirational quote to it, it's still a great story. Hey guys, and welcome to Film Study, where we analyze films in various ways to make you see it in a different concept, and change a part of a scene and see how it would affect the rest of the story. There are many other theories out there, like the woman who we see in the beginning of the film being the mother of the food critic Anton Ego, or possibly to Linguini as well. But for this theory, we're going to have to throw those out the window for now and start from scratch. My question is, what else could she contribute to the film if she was more involved, and if the restaurant were to be exposed by Remy, could it still technically run? In order to figure this out, we now need to know who she is and what she does contribute as we do see her. Starting off, the other theories that involve her, such as, well, the only one being when Remy goes in her house looking for an ingredient for his little concoction he put together. I will admit though, the similarities between the flashback scene in that lady's house has some pretty convincing similarities. But aside from that, we first are introduced to her as she's fallen asleep in her chair in a pink hairnet and a pink gown with the design of a pot of flowers all over. She has a very small house and seems to stay with the old school style theme surrounding the interior of the home. And she's obviously not afraid to defend herself, even if it is between a couple of rats or a few hundred, going as far as following them outside. One thing I wanted to find out is if she could have ended up at the restaurant. Consider the setting and time period. By the looks of the exterior of her home, we can see that it's a cozy little French-styled house. From the time that we see Remy watching television and getting chased out, it's night, and the time that he is sitting in the sewer waiting for his family, when he surfaces to find that he was under Paris, we can assume that he wasn't waiting for too long, at the most a day, considering he's hungry and we had just seen him eat. We don't get to see enough scenes to know if it was raining prior to Remy arriving, but considering a 24-hour period could have passed, we can assume that the rain could have dried up by this point. What I'm leading up to is she could have arrived at the restaurant as well, maybe teamed up with Skinner. If somehow she saw Remy in Linguini's hat, like Skinner did, she could have asked discreetly about it and they both team up to find him or figure out what's going on, creating a plan to expose the restaurant. Think about it, Skinner was never the real rightful owner of the restaurant. When he reads the letter that Linguini gave him, he was skeptical, but it was true nonetheless. They both would have it out for Remy. Considering she had a rat-infested house she didn't even know for who knows how long, this would be a good reason she and Remy wouldn't get along if they saw each other again. The time that the restaurant would have been caught is when the health inspector is called. So for the sake of this theory, let's assume the rats didn't completely commit the crime of roping the health inspector and throwing him in the closet, and during that time, there would have been an immediate inspection on the restaurant. During a health inspection, they look over specific things which are labeled as critical and non-critical. They are designed to protect the dining public from food-related illnesses that can result if foods are not handled or prepared properly. According to an article from Markel Insurance, they declared the more critical items include observing proper hand washing, making sure food is coming from an approved source, ensure cooked foods are rapidly chilled in the appropriate amount of time, check to make sure commercial dishwashers have the correct sanitizer concentration, and verify that there has been no cross-contamination between raw and cooked or ready-to-serve products. So, according to these things, which ones are an actual health risk to the restaurant? First, they observe proper hand washing. Do we ever see Remy comply with that rule? Yes. When he falls into the restaurant through the skylight, before fixing the soup, he washes his hands. And even while his family is helping him revive the restaurant at one point, he is very strict on the others who are handling food, saying, quote, "Those handling food will walk on 2 legs. Even throughout the film, we almost never see him walk on all 4. And the only reason he does is to run. He has no choice because of the species he is. But in the end, he does comply with this requirement. As far as making sure the food is coming from an approved source, when Linguini is first introduced to the restaurant, we see that they do get their food from credible sources, including an actual grower. This has nothing to do with Remy, but regardless, the restaurant does comply. When it comes to the assurance of cooked foods being chilled in an appropriate amount of time, judging by the food quality and storage, I would say that they comply with this as well. According to a study from the University of Minnesota, foods must be cooled from 135 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours and from 70 to 41 degrees Fahrenheit within an additional 4 hours. The goal is to cool foods as quickly as possible. This is also to prevent food pathogens and bacteria from growing on the food. From what we see, they do take their food very seriously, as their company is technically hanging on by a thread before Remy came along. Commercial dishwashers are also very important, and although we don't get specific details about that, we do see the sanitization center when the rats start taking over the restaurant, and it does look like it complies with the rules as well. And for the cross-contamination, this also has nothing to do with Remy, so we can bypass that. There's also another section when it comes to non-critical items, and even though these aren't as important, they are still something that health inspectors look at, which is labeled food containers, current operator permit, properly calibrated meat thermometers, floors, walls, and ceilings properly cleaned, and break area is separate from kitchen. For labeled containers, if you pay attention and look closely, you can see that the ingredients they use are in their original containers, so that's covered. The remaining 4 cover more the employees in terms of the upkeep of the kitchen and lounge of the staff and customers, which we can see is in compliance with the rules. So when it comes to Remy, let's focus on him for a minute. Yes, he is a rat, there is no getting around that or hiding that. However, the loophole is he doesn't fail to comply with any of these rules. If the inspector were to overlook the species that he is, he would know that Remy does take this seriously, and that includes the level of health safety there is for the restaurant. So with that being said, we know Remy wouldn't be considered a hazard to the restaurant according to law. However, there would be another problem with the public, but that's if they were to find out. And that comes another question. If the inspector did agree that Remy was not a real harm to the restaurant, would he still have to reveal the information to the public? Well, this is where it gets tricky, because Remy is technically now an employee at Gusteau's. He's not required to be known to the public or shown. Now, if there was to be an incident of a customer complaining about the food, only then would there be a problem for Remy to being exposed to the public. However, the only thing that could override that is if the other staff backed him up in explaining this animal is responsible for the success of the restaurant. Just like the incident with Ego, he had the same reaction as the rest of the staff when it was revealed that Remy was actually the cook, so we know how everyone's reaction could be. Though the reaction isn't the same, if you want to get technical, humans have the tendency to have a follow instinct, such as if one person does something, the others will do as well. If the first food critic were to know that Remy was responsible for the meal, she would have shut down the restaurant immediately, but as we can see, there really wouldn't be a need to, as 1, he complies with every health code, 2, he cooks better than most people in the restaurant, and 3, he isn't at harm to the business or environment because he's not qualified as a pest. He might be viewed as one, yes, but he is far from it. So in the end, Remy could still run the restaurant under the circumstances because he complies with every health code rule. When the restaurant is now in Linguini's hands, he would still be working with Remy and the restaurant would still operate without him being hidden. Not only would Remy be complying, but he is a good cook and wholeheartedly agrees with Gusteau's motto, anyone can cook. Sure, he didn't necessarily mean any kind of animal, but even as Remy's figment of imagination, he didn't rule him out. And for more videos like this, we'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. It would really help out the channel and let us know that we are providing great content for you guys. Contemplate this other scenario. In the beginning, we learned that only one review from, well, I guess a very powerful critic that we meet later on, Anton Ego, wrote a review to the restaurant a couple years prior. This is what caused the restaurant to lose its stars and took a heavy toll on Gusteau himself. The lady that came in secretly and tasted the soup that Remy made, luckily it made her give the restaurant a great review, thus reviving the restaurant. When we first see her, what is she wearing? A pink hat. Who else did we see wear pink? The lady in the house. There is a possibility that this could be her daughter. We learn that she is a big fan of cooking, so it would be no coincidence that her daughter could have ended up a food critic, following in her mother's footsteps with the theme of food. In this case, the lady could have ended up at the restaurant at some point, possibly after the events of when Anton Ego reviewed the restaurant for the second time. By now, Skinner is almost certain that Linguini is involved with some sort of rat and doing everything he can to reveal it or at least tell someone, as he does actually spot him later on. By this time, Skinner has already been pushed out and Linguini has taken over the restaurant. After the review from Ego, what could have happened is the lady from the house ended up there and the pink hat critic, they both could have teamed up with Skinner to shut the place down considering rats were running it. There would have been conflict considering they both loved the food they were serving regardless of who was making it. Even Ego did. In the end, with the rats having to release the health inspector, if the lady was involved, what I think could have happened is the lady at the house could have taken care of him, of some sorts, and let the restaurant remain open. So what do you guys think of this little theory here? character. I knew there was a lot out there with Anton Ego and the lady who is actually unnamed, which is a little sad to be honest. I mean, she is a minor character that we see, but she could have more potential and credit than they give her, especially considering she just about eliminated a supporting character. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below.